In a world where fortunes are measured in gold, but hearts are weighed in silence, a quiet woman steps into a storm she never asked for. At the reading of billionaire Evan Sinclair's Will the Vultures Gather, polished, powerful, and greedy, they expect riches, they expect dominance. What they don't expect is Amelia Cross. She arrives without diamonds, without power, only with a simple cloth bag and a secret that will tear their perfect world apart. In a room brimming with ambition, betrayal, and hidden sins, Amelia isn't here to fight for wealth. She's here for something far more dangerous. The truth, and when the facade cracks, when the last lie falls, the question will no longer be who will inherit. It will be who deserves to survive the truth. She was dismissed the moment she stepped into the will reading. Clad in a gray linen dress, a faded cardigan, and quiet flats, Amelia Clark needed little more to draw sneers from a room full of polished heirs, their smiles too sharp to be sincere. A man wearing a gold tie was the first to speak, his voice half laughing, half mocking. "Is that the maid?" Nearby, a young woman tilted her head and whispered into her friend's ear. "Probably some sad ex-mistress looking for a payout." Amelia Clark stood silently at the back of the room. She didn't respond, didn't flinch. She merely adjusted the strap of the worn cloth bag in her hand. To them, she was nothing more than a shadow, an outsider who had wandered into a place reserved for bloodlines, legacy, and status. But they were wrong. The woman they just humiliated was in truth the legal wife of the man they had gathered to inherit from. And today's willow reading, it was a test one she had helped design. The Thorne estate stretched across a wooded hill, its stone walls and iron gates standing like a fortress against the outside world. Inside the grand hall carried the heavy scent of old money, polished oak, aged leather, and the faint aroma of roses from vases that cost more than most people's rent. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, capturing the April light and scattering it across the gathered crowd. In total, relatives, investors, advisors, assistants, each impeccably dressed to stake their claim in Evan Thorne's empire. Tailored suits, flowing silk dresses, and diamonds that winked with every gesture filled the hall. They milled about sipping champagne, their condolences as practiced and hollow as their smiles. Amelia slipped in quietly, the soles of her flats whispering across the marble floor. She moved to the back corner, near a tall window that framed the misty hills beyond. Her dress was simple, loose enough to move freely, the gray fabric soft with years of wear. The pale blue cardigan she wore had seen better days, hanging slightly off one shoulder. Her dark hair was gathered into a low bun, with a few strands falling loose to frame a face that needed no makeup to command attention. High cheekbones, keen hazel eyes that missed nothing, and lips that remained closed where others would have lashed out. At 36, Amelia was beautiful in a way that didn't shout for attention, but lingered like a melody one couldn't forget. Marcus Sinclair Evans' second cousin leaned casually against a mahogany table, his Rolex catching the light as he smirked and called out, "Seriously, who let the cleaning staff in?" His voice carried deliberately across the room, drawing chuckles from a nearby cluster of cousins. A woman in a crimson dress, Sabrina Marcus's sister, tossed her hair and added with a smirk, "Maybe she's here to dust the will before it's read." The laughter that followed was sharp and brittle, like glass shattering. Across the room, a younger woman, Vivian, a niece with a tech startup and a viral TikTok following, nudged her friend Elise, a former assistant to Evan's CFO. "Bet she's one of his charity cases," Vivian whispered loud enough for Amelia to hear. "Or maybe a mistress he forgot about." "Look at that bag. It's like she packed her lunch in it," Elise snickered, snapping a discreet photo of Amelia with her phone. "This is going on my story," she whispered, her tone thick with mockery. "Thorne will flop." Vivian's fingers flew across her screen, her smirk widening as she typed a caption for the picture of Amelia. "Found Evan's charity case crashing the will reading. Guess she thinks thrift store chic gets her $1 billion." She said it loudly, making sure Amelia heard every cruel word. The crowd around her erupted into laughter, some pulling out their own phones to like, comment, and share the post. Within moments, it was already gaining traction online. Comments flooded in, strangers jeering, calling Amelia a nobody desperate for a fortune. Their digital cruelty mirrored the scorn filling the grand hall. Amelia stood motionless. Her hazel eyes caught the glow from Vivian's phone screen, but she didn't speak. Her silence seemed only to encourage them, as if her composure was a defiance they couldn't bear to leave unchallenged. Elise leaned closer to Vivian, her voice dripping with false pity. Poor thing doesn't even know she's a meme now. The laughter swelled a chorus of cruelty that stripped Amelia of humanity, turning her dignity into sport for their amusement. Amelia's fingers tightened briefly on the strap of her cloth bag, a simple, carefully stitched bag with no logo in sight. Still, she didn't look at Vivian or Elise. She didn't acknowledge Marcus's sneer, nor Sabrina's taunts. She simply stood there, her breathing steady, her gaze locked on the empty chair at the front, where the lawyer would soon sit to them. Her silence was weakness, a confirmation that she didn't belong. But they couldn't see the steel beneath it. The quiet, effortless way Amelia held the entire room without lifting a finger. The crowd grew louder as more guests arrived. Among them, Harrison Hayes, a former investor clad in a pinstripe suit, leaned toward his wife and muttered, "Evan always had strays hanging around. This one's got no business here." His wife, dripping in emeralds, gave a dismissive nod, her eyes raking over Amelia's simple outfit. "No class," she said in a stage whisper. "She's embarrassing the family just by standing there." Across the room, Mercer, a distant cousin wearing a velvet blazer, cupped his hands around his mouth and called out mockingly, "Hey, sweetheart, kitchen's that way." He pointed toward a side door, grinning broadly as his friends roared with laughter and clapped him on the back. Nearby, Margaret, a twice-removed aunt wrapped in layers of pearls, clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "Really, someone should escort her out before the lawyer gets here," she said. "It's disrespectful to Evan's memory." Sabrina, her crimson dress swishing with every step, crossed the room toward Amelia. The sharp click of her heels on the marble floor sounded like a countdown. She stopped just inches away, towering over Amelia's smaller frame, her perfume thick and suffocating in the air. Sabrina smiled coldly and said, her voice loud enough for the entire room to hear, "You're in the wrong place, darling." With a gesture full of disdain, she reached out and flicked Amelia's cardigan, her manicured nails grazing the worn fabric as if brushing off dirt. "This isn't a soup kitchen. Why don't you leave before you embarrass yourself further?" Sabrina's voice rang out cruel and cutting. The crowd watched, some smirking, others whispering, but none stepping in. Amelia's hands remained steady on her cloth bag, but the invasion of her space, the sharp, suffocating closeness, felt like a violation. Sabrina's aggression was deliberate, a calculated threat. Nearby, a cousin muttered, "She's got some nerve staying." The room practically buzzed with approval. Their silence was not neutrality, it was complicity. Still, Amelia didn't move. Her eyes flicked briefly to the security camera mounted in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. She knew the feed was live, recorded to a private server. Only two people had access to it, herself and someone who wasn't here yet. As Arthur Julian, the lawyer, prepared to read the will, Mercer, wearing his velvet blazer, slipped behind Amelia, whispering to his friends, "Watch this." He grabbed a cocktail napkin from a nearby table, scribbled "charity case" on it with a Sharpie, and without Amelia noticing, tucked it into the strap of her bag. The snickers spread across the room like wildfire. Fingers pointed. Vivian snapped another photo, barely containing her laughter, while Elise leaned in and whispered, "She's a walking joke now." Amelia stood unaware, her focus locked on Julian. But around her, the crowd's glee was electric, a cruel amusement, a knife twisting deeper into her dignity. Mercer leaned back, grinning. Margaret, pearls gleaming at her throat, muttered under her breath, "Serves her right for showing up like that." This wasn't just mockery, it was a spectacle, a public shaming, punishment for daring to exist among them. At precisely 10 a.m., Arthur Julian entered. His gray suit was sharp, his leather briefcase heavy with secrets. He was older, mid-60s, with a face carved by decades of managing fortunes and feuds. The room fell into a heavy hush as he placed the briefcase on the table, opened it, and pulled out a single sealed envelope. No grand announcement, no theatrics. He simply adjusted his glasses and scanned the crowd, pausing just briefly on Amelia. A fraction of a second. But it was enough. Marcus, catching the look, frowned and leaned towards Sabrina, whispering, "What's that about?" Harrison Hayes, unable to contain himself, stood abruptly, his pinstriped suit wrinkled as he jabbed a trembling finger at Amelia. "This woman is a fraud," he roared, his voice echoing against the marble. "Evan would never let someone like her near his estate. She's here to scam us, plain and simple." The room buzzed with angry agreement. Heads nodded, eyes narrowed. Amelia became the villain in their narrative. Harrison's wife, emeralds flashing under the chandelier, light added sharply, "She's probably carrying a fake ID in that rag of a bag." The accusations hung heavy, turning Amelia's presence into an offense they couldn't tolerate. Still, Amelia stood tall, her gaze steady, though the weight of their judgment pressed down like a storm. Each accusation was another lash meant to break her. The crowd murmured their outrage, feeding off one another, growing louder, hungrier. But Amelia's silence was a wall they could not breach. Julian cleared his throat. We are here to read the last will and testament of Evan Alexander Sinclair, executed 3 years ago and verified as authentic. A ripple of shock ran through the room. 3 years ago, Evan had disappeared, only 6 months ago. His private jet lost somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. No wreckage, no body, just a mystery that had fueled headlines, whispered conspiracies, and sharpened greedy ambitions. Most assumed he was dead. Most hoped Marcus straightened his gold tie, a smug grin returning to his face. Let's get to it then, he said, eager, as if preparing to accept his crown. Vivian leaned forward, her manicured nails tapping anxiously on her phone, already composing a victory post in her mind. Harrison crossed his arms, muttering about stock options. Margaret clutched her pearls tighter, whispering to Mercer about the summer house in Nice. Amelia remained still. Her bag now rested by her feet. She watched Julian's hands as he broke the wax seal, the small crack of it loud as a gunshot in the expectant silence. The room leaned forward, breathing, shallow eyes gleaming. This was the moment, the one they had dressed for, traveled across oceans, for schemed and whispered, and smiled their poison smiles for Evan's empire. Tech patents, real estate holdings, and a biotech firm valued at nearly $90 billion was about to change hands, or so they thought. Julian unfolded the will carefully, his voice steady, deliberate. Each word fell into the room like stones dropped into a still lake. I, Evan Alexander Sinclair, being of sound mind, do hereby declare this my final will. I leave nothing but this truth. Wealth reveals character, not worth. The room froze. Marcus's confident smile wavered. Vivian's phone slipped an inch in her manicured hand. Harrison's jaw clenched so tightly his temples pulsed, and his wife's emerald necklace suddenly felt unbearably heavy against her throat. Nothing. The word cracked through the silence, disbelief rippling like a tremor. But Julian remained unshaken. He continued, voice even. All my assets, company shares, properties, accounts, and intellectual rights are bequeathed to one person. A breathless stillness gripped the room. The one who stood by me, that for no reason other than love. The one who never asked my net worth, never sought my name for status, my wife Amelia. A collective gasp tore through the hall, sharp and ragged. Heads whipped around, eyes wild, searching desperately for a face to match the name that had just shattered their world. Marcus barked out a disbelieving laugh. Wife Evan wasn't married. Across the room, Sabrina's hand flew to her mouth, her crimson nails stark against her paling skin. Vivian's eyes narrowed, darting to Elise, who mouthed, What the hell? Harrison surged to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the marble. This is absurd, he thundered. Evan never mentioned a wife. This is a scam. Someone's forged the damn thing. Panic flickered across the room like a wildfire. Margaret clutched Mercer's arm, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. She's not here, is she? Some gold digger we've never met, stealing what's rightfully ours. Julian raised a hand, silencing the uproar. The will is legal, signed and notarized, he said firmly. Supporting documents, marriage certificate, photographs, personal letters are all available for verification. He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a folder. Opening it, he revealed a photograph. Evan Younger laughing, his arm around Amelia, who wore a simple white dress. They stood outside a courthouse, sunlight catching their smiles. On the bar, a date was scrawled 7 years ago. The room erupted. Marcus slammed his fist onto the table. This is insanity. Who is she? Vivian. Her phone momentarily forgotten shouted. Where's this Amelia show her? Mercer sneered. Probably some con artist hiding in the back. Sabrina's voice sliced through the chaos, venomous. If she's real, why isn't she standing here, too ashamed to show her face? Then quietly Amelia stepped forward. The movement was small, deliberate, like the tide turning unstoppable and sure. Her flats made no sound on the marble floor, but every pair of eyes followed her as she crossed the room. Her cardigan swayed lightly. The gray linen of her dress caught the light, soft and worn, but dignified. She stopped beside Julian, standing straight, calm. The cloth bag hung at her side, humble yet unyielding, just like her. Silence fell thick and stunned. Marcus's mouth opened, then closed again. Vivian flushed crimson, the photo she had once proudly taken, now burning a hole in her pocket. Harrison sank back into his chair, and his wife's emeralds dulled, as if drained of their sparkle. Margaret clutched her pearls, frozen mid-gesture. Julian nodded at Amelia, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "Mrs. Sinclair," he said, handing her the folder. Amelia took it without a tremor, her fingers steady. She opened the folder, her eyes softening just briefly as she looked at the photograph, an echo of a memory lived and cherished. Then she closed it and turned to face the crowd. "I didn't come for the money," Amelia said, her voice low and clear, carrying through the heavy air like a bell through fog. "I came to see who you really were, to see who among you cared for Evan as a man, not a bank account, to see who mourned him, not his fortune." She paused, her hazel eyes sweeping the room, pinning each person where they stood. "You showed me exactly who you are." Marcus found his voice shaky but sneering. "You're saying you're his wife, he gestured at her dress, her cardigan, his laugh forced and ugly. "No offense, lady, but you look like you shop at thrift stores." Amelia didn't blink. "I do," she said simply. "Evan didn't care. He loved me for me, not for what I wore or what I owned." "Can any of you say the same?" Vivian snorted, folding her arms. "Nice act, but I'm not buying it. If you're his wife, where's the proof? A photo's not enough. Anyone can fake that." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, growing louder. Harrison nodded fiercely. "She's right. We need more witnesses, records, something real." Julian remained unbothered. He opened his briefcase once again and pulled out a thick stack of documents. A marriage license dated 7 years ago, signed by both Evan and Amelia, and witnessed by Sarah Ellis, a nurse, and Michael Reed, Amar Breed, a librarian. Personal letters from Evan to Amelia, handwritten, verified by forensic experts. Bank records showing joint accounts created under Evan's instructions, kept private by his choice. And finally, a small USB drive. Julian inserted the USB into a laptop. A screen mounted on the wall flickered to life. The grainy video showed courthouse steps. Evan in a simple suit, Amelia radiant in a plain white dress. They laughed, kissed, and were clapped by Sarah and Michael, their witnesses. The date stamp matched the marriage certificate exactly. The room crumbled. Defiance collapsed into stunned disbelief. Eyes darted back to Amelia, who watched the footage with a quiet ache in her gaze. Sabrina stepped forward, her voice trembling with rage. "This is a setup. You planned this, tricking us into looking bad. You're nobody. Evan would never marry someone like you." Her words struck like thrown stones, but Amelia's face remained unchanged. She let the anger hang there, rotting in the silence. Then she spoke, her voice colder, now sharpened like a blade. "You're right about one thing. This was planned, not to trick you, but to test you, to see if any of you would bother asking who I was before mocking me, to see if anyone would honor Evan's memory or just claw for his fortune." She stepped closer. Her quiet presence swallowed the space around them, undeniable and absolute. "You failed, all of you," Mercer laughed nervously, desperate to regain control. "Test? What is this, a game show? Come on, you can't be serious." But no one laughed with him, not anymore. But Mercer's voice wavered, faltering, as Amelia's steady, unyielding gaze met his. Without a word, she reached into her cloth bag and pulled out a small remote. Her next words dropped like thunder in the silent hall. "Evan isn't dead." Each word was sharp, deliberate. She pressed the remote. A monitor mounted on the wall flickered to life. There, seated in a dimly lit room, was Evan Sinclair. At 42, he was lean, his dark hair threaded with gray, his blue eyes still piercingly sharp. He leaned back casually in a chair, his expression calm but unyielding, like a judge weighing the souls of the guilty. The video feed was live. The timestamp in the corner read, April 15th, 2025, 10:32 a.m. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, disbelief thickened the air. Marcus stumbled back, his gold tie skewed awkwardly. Vivian dropped her phone, the screen cracking loudly against the marble floor. Harrison's wife clutched his arm, whispering hoarsely, "No, it can't be." Across the room, Margaret's pearl necklace, snapped beads scattering across the floor like tiny frantic heartbeats. Evan's voice came through the speakers, low and resonant. "You thought I was gone. You thought this was your chance to carve up my life like a cake. But I've been here, watching, listening. Every word, every sneer, every lie." His gaze shifted as if through the camera, locking onto Amelia. "She warned me you'd show your true colors." And she was right. Amelia's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. She turned to face the crowd, her voice steady as stone. Evan's plane didn't crash. It was a cover, a way to step back, to see who would stay loyal and who would turn. She swept her gaze across them, not with anger, but with cold, cutting clarity. You rushed here dressed in your finest, ready to tear apart what wasn't yours, but this was never about money. It was about truth. At that moment, the grand hall's double doors swung open. Evan Sinclair walked in. He was real solid. His presence hit the room like a storm breaking across a still sea. He wore a simple suit, no tie, his shoes scuffed from travel, but no one could mistake the authority in his stride. The crowd parted instinctively, their whispers dying on their tongues. Their bravado evaporated, leaving only fear and shame in its wake. Evan crossed the room in silence, stopping beside Amelia. His hand brushed hers, a quiet anchoring touch. Amelia looked up at him, her eyes softening, and he gave a small nod. Then Evan turned to face the room, his voice cutting through the thick air. Amelia designed this, the will, the reading, the cameras, all of it. He let that sink in before continuing. She wanted to know who you were when you thought no one was watching, who would respect a stranger, who would show kindness, who would care about me, not my bank account. Evan's eyes swept the room, pinning each person under his gaze. Not one of you passed. He zeroed in on Marcus, the first to mock Amelia, the loudest voice in her humiliation. Marcus's gold tie now looked like a gaudy noose around his trembling neck. You called my wife a maid, Evan said, his voice low but lethal, each word slicing into the stunned silence. You laughed while she stood alone. You showed your true self. His gaze hardened. Did you think I wouldn't see? Marcus shrank back, fumbling helplessly with his toy, as if it could shield him. His bravado was gone, stripped away by the brutal reality standing before him. Evan stepped forward, towering without effort. You're not family, Marcus. You're a parasite, and I'm done feeding you. A uniformed guard appeared at Marcus's side. His grip was firm and final. As Marcus was escorted out, his protest drowned in the echo of Evan's words. The hall watched in frozen, breathless silence.